Introduction. Welcome, and thank you for joining me on this journey. Whether you are reading this book or listening to the audiobook, I hope these pages inspire you to discover one of nature's most remarkable gifts, the Moringa tree. Along the way, I'll share stories passed down through generations, practical knowledge from everyday life in rural Thailand, and modern scientific discoveries that help explain why this extraordinary tree has earned such respect around the world. Most importantly, I encourage you to keep reading. Each chapter builds upon the last, revealing new stories, useful insights, and practical ways to bring Moringa into your own life. So, find a comfortable place, relax, and let's begin our journey together. There is an old Thai saying my grandmother used to repeat whenever someone became ill. Nature usually gives us the answer before we even know the question. As a little girl, I never really understood what she meant. I only knew that whenever someone in our village had a fever, a stomach problem, aching joints, or simply felt tired after working long days in the fields, my grandmother would quietly walk into the garden. She never hurried. She never worried. She simply returned carrying a handful of green leaves. Sometimes they became tea. Sometimes they were cooked with vegetables. Sometimes they were crushed into a paste. Sometimes they were dried for another season. For her, these leaves were as ordinary as rice. Years later, I discovered that people around the world call this remarkable plant Moringa. Many even call it the miracle tree. To my grandmother, however, it was never a miracle. It was simply part of everyday life. Only much later did scientists begin publishing research explaining why generations of people had trusted this remarkable tree. That is one of the reasons I decided to write this book. Not to convince anyone, not to promise miracles, simply to share what our family has learned through generations, together with what modern science has discovered. Throughout these pages, you will meet farmers, grandparents, researchers, doctors, cooks, and ordinary families who have welcomed Moringa into their daily lives. Some stories will make you smile. Some may surprise you. Others may encourage you to plant your very first tree. Whether you read every page or simply open this book from time to time, I hope it inspires you to look a little closer at the gifts that nature quietly offers us every single day. And if, after reading this book, you become curious to explore carefully selected Moringa products, recipes, and practical resources, you will find a link near the end of the book where we share the same products and ideas we use here at Sally's Farm. So pour yourself a cup of tea, find a comfortable chair, and let me tell you the story of one extraordinary tree. Welcome to Sally's Farm. Welcome to the world of Moringa. Chapter 1. The Tree My Grandmother Trusted. Nature usually gives us the answer before we even know the question. Those were the words my grandmother repeated throughout my childhood. At the time, I thought she was simply speaking in riddles. I had no idea that one ordinary tree growing beside our little home would stay with me for the rest of my life. I grew up in rural Thailand, where life followed the rhythm of the seasons. We woke before sunrise, worked with the land, cared for our animals, and shared almost everything we had with our neighbors. We were not wealthy. In fact, by today's standards, many people would probably say we were poor. But we never felt poor. We had fresh food, clean water, a loving family, and a garden filled with plants that my grandmother knew as well as she knew the names of her grandchildren. She never called herself a healer. She never claimed to possess special gifts. She simply paid attention to nature. Among all the fruit trees, herbs, vegetables, and flowering plants around our home stood one tree that she seemed to visit almost every day. Its branches were never especially beautiful. Its flowers were modest. Its leaves looked ordinary. If you didn't know better, you would probably walk straight past it without giving it a second glance. That tree was Moringa. One afternoon, when I was about 8 years old, I asked her a question that made her laugh. "Grandmother," I said, "why do you always pick leaves from the ugly tree?" She smiled. Instead of answering, she handed me a small basket. "Come with me." Together, we walked across the garden. She gently picked only the youngest leaves. Never too many, never more than the tree could easily replace. I remember asking why she didn't take whole branches. She looked at me with a smile that I still remember today. "If someone is kind to you," she said softly, "you don't repay that kindness by hurting them." Even now, many years later, I still think about those words whenever I harvest anything from nature. To my grandmother, every tree deserved respect. Every plant deserved gratitude. Nothing was taken without appreciation. That evening, she cooked the fresh leaves with garlic, shallots, and eggs. It became one of the simplest meals we had that week. Nothing about it seemed unusual. No one spoke about vitamins. No one mentioned antioxidants. No one discussed scientific studies. It was simply dinner. Only many years later would I discover that scientists were beginning to study the same leaves my grandmother had trusted her entire life. As I read those research papers, I found myself smiling, not because science had discovered something new, but because it was finally beginning to explain something my grandmother had quietly known all along. That was the day I realized this book was never going to be about a tree. It was going to be about wisdom, and sometimes wisdom grows quietly in a garden, waiting patiently for the rest of the world to catch up. Science today. Modern research has identified Moringa oleifera, as one of the most nutrient-dense edible plants studied to date. Its leaves naturally contain protein, fiber, vitamins A, C, and E, calcium, potassium, iron, and hundreds of plant compounds, including polyphenols and flavonoids that are being investigated for their antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. Science continues to explore exactly how these compounds may support human health. But one thing is already clear: Moringa is far more than just another leafy tree. Chapter 2. Lessons. Beneath the Moringa Tree. Some of my happiest childhood memories were made beneath the shade of a single tree, not because something extraordinary happened there, but because life happened there. When the day's work was finished, my mother would often carry a woven basket into the garden while I followed behind her. She never told me to hurry. She never rushed through the work. She believed that food prepared in peace somehow tasted better. Sometimes we picked vegetables, sometimes herbs, and almost every day we gathered a handful of fresh moringa leaves. One afternoon, I asked her a question. "Mother, why do we eat moringa so often?" She smiled, without looking up from the basket. "Because your grandmother taught me to," I laughed. "But why did Grandma eat it?" This time she stopped picking leaves. She looked toward the old moringa tree standing quietly at the edge of the garden. "Because her mother taught her." Then she looked back at me. "One day perhaps you'll ask the tree that question yourself." At the time, I thought she was joking. Years later, I realized she wasn't. She wasn't talking about words. She was talking about observation. Every season teaches something different. A farmer who pays attention begins to notice small things: how one plant survives a long drought, how another quickly recovers after heavy rain, how birds seem to visit certain trees before others, how healthy soil smells different from tired soil. Nature speaks, just not with words. My mother believed that people had become too busy to listen. Whenever visitors came to our home, she never began by talking about medicine. She began by preparing food, fresh vegetables, rice, fruit, sometimes fish. And almost always, there would be a bowl of moringa somewhere on the table, not because she believed it could cure every illness, but because she believed good health begins long before we become sick. That simple idea has stayed with me throughout my life. Today, many nutrition experts encourage people to eat a wide variety of colorful, nutrient-rich foods every day. My mother never read those recommendations. She simply lived them. Looking back now, I realize that the greatest lessons she gave me had very little to do with moringa itself. She taught me patience, gratitude, moderation, and respect for every meal placed on the table. Perhaps that is why, even today, whenever I prepare fresh moringa leaves, I don't think first about vitamins. I think about my mother. I can still hear her gentle voice. Food prepared with love always nourishes more than the body. Those words have become one of the guiding principles of my own life. Chapter 3. The Tree. Everyone took for granted. Have you ever noticed that the most valuable things in life are often the ones people overlook? The air we breathe, clean water, the laughter of a child, the shade of a tree on a hot afternoon. Moringa was like that in our village. No one admired it. No one planted it to impress the neighbors. No one stood beneath it taking photographs. It simply stood there, quietly serving everyone. When I was a little girl, I remember visitors asking my mother about the mango trees. They admired the banana plants. They commented on the coconuts. No one ever asked about the moringa tree. One day, I mentioned this to my mother. "Why does nobody talk about the moringa tree?" She smiled. "Because people usually notice beauty before they notice usefulness." Those words stayed with me. Years later, after meeting people from many different countries, I realized she had been right. Many people search for expensive supplements while ignoring the remarkable plants growing quietly around them. My grandmother used to say something else that I never forgot. The best servant is the one who never asks to be praised. That was how she saw moringa. It gave us leaves. It gave us flowers. It gave us young seed pods. Its seeds could help clean water. Its branches grew quickly. Its roots reached deep into the soil. Almost every part of the tree had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. That wasn't because we were poor. It was because we had learned to respect what nature provided. My father often reminded me that a farmer should never judge a tree by its appearance. A tree earns its place by what it gives. Looking back now, I believe that lesson applies to people as well. The kindest people are not always the loudest. The wisest people are rarely the ones seeking attention. And perhaps the greatest gifts in life often arrive quietly, just like the moringa tree. Today, people from around the world travel thousands of miles to learn about this remarkable plant. Researchers study it, farmers cultivate it, nutritionists recommend it, businesses create products from it. Yet every time I see another scientific article about moringa, I cannot help but smile. Because I still remember a simple tree growing beside our family home, a tree that never tried to become famous. It simply continued doing what it had always done, helping anyone who cared enough to notice. From Sally's Kitchen. In Thailand, one of my favorite ways to enjoy fresh moringa leaves is in a simple soup with garlic, shallots, and egg. It is inexpensive, nourishing, and reminds me of family meals shared after long days on the farm. If you enjoy cooking, don't forget that this book is accompanied by a moringa recipe book. where I share many of the traditional family recipes we still prepare at Sally's farm. Chapter 4. The Story. Everyone in our village knew. My mother used to say, "Never ignore the quiet advice of old people. They have already walked the road you are just beginning." There is a story from my childhood that I have never forgotten. I was probably 10 or 11 years old when an elderly man named Uncle Somchai came to visit our home. Everyone in the village knew him. He had spent his entire life working in the rice fields. Even after reaching an age when most people slowed down, he continued to work almost every day. He was one of those people who believed that as long as his hands could still work, there was no reason to sit still. Then, one year, everything changed. He became weak. At first, people thought it was simply because he was getting older. He became tired after only a short walk. His appetite disappeared. His wife later told my mother that he barely wanted to leave his bed. In a small village, news travels quickly. Within days, everyone knew that Uncle Somchai was no longer himself. One afternoon, my grandmother filled a small basket with fresh vegetables. There were chilies, garlic, Thai basil, a few eggs from our chickens, and a generous handful of fresh Moringa leaves. I remember asking her where she was going. "To visit a friend," she replied. I followed her along the dusty road that wound between the rice fields. The afternoon sun was beginning to soften, and the air carried the scent of jasmine and damp earth after a light rain. When we arrived, Uncle Somchai was sitting quietly outside his house. He smiled politely, but I could see that something was different. His shoulders were lower than I remembered. His face looked pale. His voice had lost its strength. Grandmother never asked many questions. She simply handed the basket to his wife. "I brought something for tonight's dinner." The women sat together talking for almost an hour. The men talked about the weather, the coming rice harvest, and whether enough rain would fall before the end of the season. No one spoke dramatically about illness. No one promised miracles. Before we left, my grandmother quietly suggested adding fresh moringa leaves to his meals whenever possible. "They are nourishing," she said gently, "and nourishing food is never a bad place to begin." That was all. Nothing more. Several weeks passed. Children don't usually notice the passing of time, but one morning I saw Uncle Somchai walking slowly along the road with a bundle of bamboo over his shoulder. He still walked carefully. He was still thinner than before, but he smiled. Months later, he was back in the rice fields, working alongside his sons. Did the moringa leaves restore his strength? I honestly don't know. Perhaps they helped. Perhaps good food, more rest, the care of his family, and time all worked together. Life is rarely explained by one single reason, but in our village, people remembered that my grandmother had carried that little basket to his home. Years later, I asked my mother whether she truly believed moringa had made the difference. She thought for a long moment before answering. "I don't know if it was the leaves," she said. "I know it was the love." Then she smiled, and sometimes love arrives carrying a basket of fresh food. That answer stayed with me. As I grew older and began reading scientific studies about nutrition, I realized something important. Healthy food is not medicine in the way many people imagine. It does not replace doctors. It does not replace proper medical care. But our bodies are built from what we eat, day after day, year after year. A nourishing meal may not change everything overnight, yet thousands of nourishing meals can change the course of a lifetime. That is how my family always viewed Moringa. Not as magic, not as a miracle, but as one small gift from nature that deserved a place at the table. My mother often reminded me that people sometimes spend their lives searching for extraordinary answers while overlooking ordinary habits. She would point to the garden. "Health grows here," she would say, "one meal at a time." As I think back on all the stories my grandmother and mother shared with me, I realize they never tried to convince anyone. They simply lived in a way that inspired others. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson the moringa tree has taught me. It never demands attention. It simply grows, gives generously, and quietly changes lives, one leaf at a time. Sometimes the first step toward better health isn't finding the perfect remedy. It's sitting down to your first nourishing meal and believing tomorrow can be better than today. Chapter 5. The Woman Who Had Lost Hope. My mother often said, "When someone comes to your door carrying worry, don't begin by giving advice. Begin by making tea." There are many stories I have heard over the years that I cannot prove. Some may have grown a little with each retelling. Others may have lost a few details as they passed from one generation to the next. But whether every word is true has never been the most important part. Stories carry wisdom. And this is one of the stories I treasure most. Long before Sally's farm became known outside our province, there lived an elderly woman in a neighboring village named May Noi. Everyone described her in the same way. She laughed easily. She never visited anyone without bringing fruit from her garden. She remembered every birthday. She always had time for children. Then one year, she stopped visiting. People noticed because the laughter disappeared. The basket of fruit no longer appeared at neighbors' doors. Her garden slowly became overgrown. One morning, my mother said, "We should go and see her." As always, she carried a basket. Inside were eggs, garlic, fresh vegetables, ginger, homemade broth, and a large bundle of freshly picked moringa leaves. I remember asking, "Why do we always bring food?" Mother smiled. "Because hungry people rarely need advice." When we arrived, May Noi welcomed us politely, but she looked exhausted. She apologized because the house wasn't tidy. She apologized because she hadn't cooked. She apologized because she hadn't been outside for days. My mother ignored every apology. Instead, she walked into the little kitchen. Within minutes, she had a pot on the stove. The smell of garlic began filling the room. Then came onions, then ginger. Finally, she added the bright green moringa leaves just before serving. The house, which had felt cold only moments before, suddenly felt alive again. The three women sat around the table for nearly 2 hours. They laughed, they cried. Sometimes they simply sat in silence. As a child, I grew restless and wandered outside, chasing butterflies around the garden. When we returned home that afternoon, I asked Mother, "Did the soup make her better?" She thought for a moment. "No." I looked surprised. It was only the beginning. Years later, I understood what she meant. Healing is rarely one single moment. It is usually 1,000 small moments. One nourishing meal, one good night's sleep, one encouraging conversation, one walk in the sunshine, one reason to smile again. A few weeks later, May Noi began working in her garden again. Not because she had suddenly become young, not because one bowl of soup had changed everything. She simply took one small step, then another, and another. Mother often reminded me that nature doesn't hurry. A seed doesn't become a tree overnight. A chick doesn't become a laying hen in a week. Good soil takes years to build. Good health often follows the same quiet rhythm, little by little, day by day. That lesson has stayed with me ever since. Today, people often ask me, "Sally, how much moringa should I eat?" I always smile before answering, because I think they are asking the wrong question. The better question is, what kind of life do you want to build? If someone eats moringa every day, but sleeps only 4 hours each night, if they never exercise, if they live under constant stress, if they eat highly processed food from morning until evening, then moringa cannot carry that burden alone. Nature was never designed to work that way, but place moringa into a life built on balance, fresh food, movement, rest, friendship, purpose, laughter. Now something beautiful begins to happen, not overnight, but gradually, almost too slowly to notice, until one day you suddenly realize you feel better than you did a year ago. Perhaps that is why my grandmother never called moringa a miracle. To her, the real miracle was something much greater: the human body, its ability to repair, to adapt, to recover, given the right care. That is why she respected food so deeply, not because food performs miracles, but because it gives the body the tools it needs to do what it was wonderfully designed to do. I have carried that lesson with me throughout my life. Every time I harvest fresh moringa leaves at Sally's farm, I think about all the families who will take them home. Some will make soup, some will blend them into smoothies, some will dry the leaves for tea, some will sprinkle the powder into their favorite recipes. Each family will have its own reason, but I hope they all discover the same simple truth my mother taught me all those years ago. Good health is not built in a pharmacy. It begins around the family table. As I think back on all the stories my grandmother and mother shared with me, I realize they never tried to convince anyone. They simply lived in a way that inspired others. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson the moringa tree has taught me. It never demands attention. It simply grows, gives generously and quietly, changes lives, one leaf at a time. Sometimes the first step toward better health isn't finding the perfect remedy. It's sitting down to your first nourishing meal and believing tomorrow can be better than today. Chapter 6: The Doctor Who Came to Prove Us Wrong. My grandmother used to smile whenever people argued about nature. The truth, she would say, never becomes smaller because someone doubts it. One of the most interesting visitors I have ever welcomed to Sally's farm did not come because he believed in moringa. He came because he didn't. He was a doctor from Europe, kind, intelligent, curious, but also deeply skeptical. He introduced himself politely and explained that he had heard many extraordinary claims about moringa while traveling through Asia. "It seems," he said with a smile, "that everyone believes this tree can solve almost every problem." I laughed. "You've been talking to the wrong people." He looked surprised. "Aren't you trying to convince me otherwise?" "No," I replied. "I'm only trying to introduce you to a tree." That answer seemed to catch him off guard. For the next several hours, we walked through the farm. He expected a sales presentation. Instead, we talked about chickens, about ducks, about healthy soil, about rainfall, about compost, about the importance of earthworms, about why birds always seem to gather near certain trees. Eventually, we arrived beneath one of our oldest moringa trees. He looked up into its branches. "So," he said, "when do you begin telling me about the miracle?" I smiled. "I don't," he laughed. "I thought that was the whole point." "No." I reached up and picked a handful of fresh leaves. "The miracle isn't the tree." He looked puzzled. "The miracle is that nature produces food this nutritious, with nothing more than sunlight, rain, healthy soil, and time." He became quiet. We continued walking. I explained that I become uncomfortable whenever I hear someone describe any plant as though it possesses magical powers. Nature doesn't work that way. Every fruit has strengths. Every vegetable has strengths. Every herb has strengths. No single food can replace an unhealthy lifestyle. No leaf can replace a doctor. No powder can undo years of neglect. He nodded. I wish more people said that. So do I. We spent the afternoon talking about nutrition rather than medicine. He told me about patients who searched endlessly for miracle cures while ignoring the obvious advice they had already been given. Eat better, move more, sleep longer, reduce stress, stop smoking, drink less alcohol, stay connected with family. Those recommendations weren't exciting. They couldn't be packaged into glossy advertisements, but decade after decade they continued proving their value. As the sun began setting behind the hills, we sat on the veranda drinking fresh moringa tea. He held the warm cup in both hands. "I have a confession." I smiled. "What is it?" "I expected to spend the day arguing with you. And instead, I think we agree about almost everything." That conversation stayed with me, not because anyone changed their mind, but because both of us cared more about truth than about winning an argument. Before leaving, he asked me one final question. If someone asked you why they should eat moringa, what would you tell them? I thought for a long moment. Then I answered as honestly as I could. I wouldn't tell them they should. He laughed. You wouldn't? No. I would tell them to learn about it. Read the research. Talk to people. Ask questions. Cook with it. Try it for themselves. And then decide. He smiled. I like that answer. Several months later, he sent me a letter. Inside was a photograph of a small moringa tree growing in a pot outside his home. On the back, he had written only one sentence. I still don't believe in miracles, but I do believe in good nutrition. I still have that photograph today. Whenever I hear someone exaggerate the abilities of moringa, I think of that doctor. He reminded me that extraordinary claims often create unnecessary doubt. The truth is already impressive enough: a fast-growing tree, edible leaves, nutritious pods, flowers that attract pollinators, seeds with remarkable practical uses, a plant that has served families across Asia and Africa for generations. Why would we need to invent stories when the real story is already so fascinating? My mother once told me something that I didn't fully understand until much later. Trust grows slowly. She was right. Trust is earned one honest conversation at a time, one shared meal at a time, one answered question at a time. That is the kind of trust I hope this book builds. Not because you believe every word I write, but because I hope you will feel that I have spoken honestly. If, after finishing this book, you become curious enough to plant your own moringa tree, or prepare your first meal using its leaves, or simply look at nature with a little more appreciation, then I will feel that these pages have served their purpose. Because this book has never been about convincing anyone. It has been about sharing the lessons that 3 generations of women shared with me, my grandmother, my mother, and now, me. As I often tell visitors to Sally's farm, nature doesn't ask us to believe. It simply invites us to observe. The more carefully we observe, the more we appreciate the quiet gifts that have surrounded us all along. The strongest roots are not held in place by promises. They are held by truth. Chapter 7: The First Leaves of the Morning. My mother never picked moringa in the middle of the day. The leaves are happiest in the cool of the morning, she would always say. Long before anyone spoke about drying temperatures, antioxidants, or preserving nutrients. My mother had her own routine. She would wake before sunrise. While the kettle slowly heated over the charcoal stove, she would walk quietly into the garden carrying nothing more than a small woven basket. As a little girl, I often followed her barefoot across the cool grass. The world felt different at that hour. The air was still. The birds had only just begun their morning songs. Tiny drops of dew rested on every leaf, sparkling as the first rays of sunlight reached over the hills. Mother never hurried. She would stop beside the moringa tree and gently lift a branch with one hand. "Look carefully," she whispered. At first, I couldn't understand what she wanted me to see. "They all look the same," she smiled. "No, they don't." She showed me the very tips of the branches. The youngest leaves were small, bright green, and incredibly tender. "They're softer," I said. "And sweeter," she replied. She picked only those delicate clusters, leaving the older leaves behind. "Why not take everything?" I asked. "Because the tree is still growing," she answered. "If we respect the tree today, it will feed us again tomorrow." That lesson shaped the way I have harvested moringa ever since. Many years later, I discovered that chefs often prefer those same young leaves because of their milder flavor and tender texture. Nutrition researchers, meanwhile, generally study the leaves as a whole, since both young and mature leaves are nutritious, though the eating experience is quite different. Back then, my mother didn't know any of that. She simply knew what generations before her had discovered with their own hands. Back in the kitchen, she separated the leaves into 3 small bowls. One bowl was for breakfast. One would be dried in the shade for tea. The last bowl was set aside for dinner. Seeing this, I finally asked the question that had been on my mind all morning. "Mother, if moringa is so good, which is the best way to eat it?" She laughed. "I've been waiting for you to ask." Back in the kitchen, the charcoal stove was already warm. Mother spread the freshly picked leaves across a woven bamboo tray. I noticed that some leaves were placed in one pile while others were placed somewhere else. "What are you doing?" "I'm deciding what each leaf will become." That answer only made me more curious. She picked up the first handful. "These beautiful young leaves will go into breakfast." She held up another handful. "These slightly older leaves will be dried." Finally, she showed me the remaining leaves. "And these will go into tonight's soup?" I frowned. "Does it matter?" "Oh, yes." She invited me to sit beside her. This is something every family should understand. She held up a fresh leaf. "If you enjoy salads or fresh vegetables, these young leaves are wonderful. They are soft, mild, and full of life." Then she pointed toward another basket. "If you want tea, the leaves should be dried carefully." "Why carefully?" "Too much heat steals some of what nature has given them." At the time, I thought she was talking about flavor. Only years later did I discover that modern researchers recommend gentle drying methods for much the same reason. Excessive heat can reduce some of the delicate compounds naturally present in the leaves. Again, science was slowly catching up with village wisdom. Mother continued sorting. If you're making soup or curry, don't cook the leaves for too long. Why? She smiled. Because vegetables don't like punishment. I laughed. She laughed too. Then she added, a few minutes is usually enough. That simple lesson has stayed with me my entire life. Even today, when visitors ask how they should prepare fresh moringa, I usually answer with another question. How would you cook spinach? Most people immediately understand. Gentle cooking, fresh ingredients. No need to complicate something that nature has already done so well. As Sally's farm grew, people from many countries began asking the same question. What is the very best way to consume moringa? Some expected me to recommend expensive capsules. Others believed tea must surely be the healthiest option. A few insisted that only powdered leaves had real value. I always smiled. There isn't only one right answer. Fresh leaves remain my personal favorite whenever they are available. Nothing compares to walking into the garden and picking food that will be on your plate only minutes later. Fresh leaves are vibrant, tender, and wonderfully versatile. We use them in soups, omelets, curries, stir-fries, and even fresh salads when the youngest shoots are available. But I also understand that most people don't have a moringa tree growing outside their kitchen. That is where dried leaves become such a wonderful gift. When dried gently in the shade or at low temperatures, they can be stored for months while retaining much of their nutritional value. Some people crumble the dried leaves into soups. Others enjoy them as tea. Many grind them into a fine green powder. That powder has become popular around the world because it is so easy to use. A spoonful can be added to a fruit smoothie, mixed into yogurt, sprinkled over rice, added to bread dough, even stirred into pasta sauce. The goal is not to taste moringa in every bite. The goal is simply to make nutritious food a natural part of everyday life. Mother always believed that healthy habits should never feel like hard work. If something is too complicated, she used to say, people stop doing it. How right she was. The healthiest habits are usually the ones simple enough to continue for years. As we finished preparing breakfast that morning, I noticed something else. Mother had left several branches completely untouched. Did you forget those? She shook her head. No. They're for next week. That answer stayed with me. She wasn't harvesting for today. She was harvesting for tomorrow as well. Without ever using the words sustainability or renewable agriculture, she understood both. Take what you need, leave enough for the future. It is a lesson our modern world sometimes forgets. The best food isn't always the most expensive. Sometimes it's the food that was growing quietly in your garden before the sun came up. Chapter 8. Beyond My Own Garden. My mother often reminded me, a tree can teach you many things, but if you want to keep learning, you must also be willing to leave its shade from time to time. For many years, I believed our little farm held all the answers I needed. After all, everything I knew about moringa had come from the two women I trusted most in the world, my grandmother and my mother. Between them, they carried almost a century of experience. They knew when to plant, when to harvest, how to prepare the leaves, how to dry them, how to cook them, how to care for the trees after heavy rain, how to prune them after the dry season. They had never attended university. They had never published scientific papers. Yet everything they taught me proved itself again and again in everyday life. As I grew older, however, I became curious. I wanted to know whether people in other parts of the world cared for the moringa tree in the same way we did. Did families in India prepare it differently? How was it grown in Africa? What had researchers discovered that village life had never explained? And perhaps, most importantly, could modern production preserve the same quality that my grandmother expected from the leaves she picked with her own hands? Those questions stayed with me for many years. Eventually, they took me far beyond my own garden. The first farms I visited filled me with excitement. Rows upon rows of healthy moringa trees stretched toward the horizon. Workers moved carefully between them, harvesting fresh branches as the morning sun slowly climbed into the sky. I remember thinking, how wonderful that so many more people are discovering this remarkable tree. But as my travels continued, I also began seeing another side of the story. Not everyone treated moringa with the same respect. Some growers seemed interested only in producing as much as possible. Speed mattered more than quality. Quantity mattered more than care. Leaves were sometimes left too long in the hot sun. Harvested branches lay on the ground for hours before being processed. Storage rooms were warm and humid. Packaging was rushed. Everything was done a little faster than it should have been. Perhaps most customers would never notice, but I did. I could see it in the color of the leaves. I could smell it. Sometimes I could even hear it in the way people talked. When someone speaks only about production numbers, I quietly wonder whether they have forgotten the tree itself. My grandmother never counted baskets. She counted healthy meals. There is a difference. One afternoon, I visited a large plantation that, from a distance, looked magnificent. Thousands upon thousands of moringa trees covered the landscape. The owner proudly explained how many tons of leaves they harvested every month. He spoke about exports, markets, sales, growth, profit. It was an impressive business. Yet during the entire tour, he never once spoke about the people who worked there. He never mentioned the soil. He never mentioned birds. He never mentioned bees. He never mentioned the families who would eventually prepare those leaves for dinner. As we drove away, I found myself strangely disappointed. Everything had been perfect, except for the one thing that mattered most, the heart. That evening I remembered something my father used to tell me. You can learn a great deal about a farmer by looking at the ground beneath his trees. Healthy soil is alive. It is filled with insects, tiny organisms, fungi, earthworms, and countless forms of life that most of us never see. If the soil is healthy, the tree has a chance to become healthy. If the tree is healthy, the leaves have the chance to become nutritious. Everything begins beneath our feet. That simple truth has never changed. Fortunately, not every journey ended with disappointment. Occasionally I met people who reminded me of home, people who became excited when they talked about compost rather than chemicals, people who smiled when they saw butterflies, people who celebrated healthy roots rather than rapid growth. Those were the conversations I enjoyed most. One elderly grower spent almost an hour explaining why he preferred harvesting only during the cooler hours of the morning. Another proudly showed me how rainwater was collected and reused throughout the farm. A young woman spoke passionately about protecting the native trees surrounding her moringa plantation because they attracted birds and beneficial insects. Listening to them, I realized something beautiful. The language was different. The country was different. The climate was different. Yet their philosophy sounded exactly like my grandmother's. Respect nature, and nature will usually reward you. During those years, I also became increasingly interested in what happened after the harvest. Picking beautiful leaves is only the beginning. How quickly are they cleaned? How are they dried? How are they stored? How are they protected from moisture? How carefully are they packaged? These questions may sound unimportant. In reality, they make an enormous difference. Imagine harvesting the sweetest strawberries you have ever tasted. Now imagine leaving them in the hot sun all afternoon. The strawberries haven't changed, but their quality certainly has. Plants deserve the same care after harvest as they do while growing. That realization changed the way I looked at every Moringa product I encountered. I stopped asking, "What does the label promise?" Instead, I began asking, "How was this made?" That question tells me far more. Then, quite unexpectedly, I received an invitation. A friend who knew of my lifelong interest in Moringa told me about a company he believed I should visit. He said very little about its products. Instead, he spoke about the people. They care about the tree, he told me. They care about the farmers. And they care about getting things right, even when it takes longer. I smiled politely. Over the years, I had heard many similar promises. Still, something about his confidence stayed with me. A few weeks later, I decided to accept the invitation. I had no idea that visit would become one of the most memorable experiences of my journey with Moringa. I won't tell you the name of the company just yet. There is a reason for that. Names are easy to remember. Values are much harder to earn. Before I introduce you to the people behind that company, I want you to understand why they impressed me. It wasn't because they had the biggest factory. It wasn't because they produced the most products. And it certainly wasn't because of clever marketing. It was because, for the first time in many years, I walked into a place where modern science and old-fashioned respect for nature lived side by side. In the next chapter, I'll take you there. I think you'll understand why I left feeling as though I had just spent another afternoon in my grandmother's garden. And later in this book, and in the companion Moringa recipe book that goes with it, I'll gladly share more about the company and the products I personally trust when life becomes too busy for me to prepare everything from fresh leaves at home. Until then, I'd rather you get to know the philosophy before you learn the name. A good harvest begins with healthy soil. A great harvest ends with honest hands. Chapter 9. Where Tradition Met Science. My grandmother often said, "The best craftsman is the one who respects both old wisdom and new knowledge." The morning I arrived, I expected another factory. By then I had visited many. Some had been impressive. Others had been disappointing. Most were somewhere in between. As our car turned through the entrance, I immediately noticed something unusual. There was no rush, no shouting, no forklifts racing from one building to another. The atmosphere felt calm, almost peaceful. Rows of healthy moringa trees surrounded the property, not planted carelessly, but with room to breathe. Between the trees, I noticed flowering plants attracting butterflies and bees. Birds moved freely through the branches. The ground beneath the trees wasn't bare and lifeless. It was covered with grasses and small plants that protected the soil from the burning tropical sun. I smiled to myself. Someone here understood that healthy soil is never just dirt. It is a living world. A gentleman greeted me at the entrance. He welcomed me warmly. but something about him immediately caught my attention. He never began talking about products. He didn't tell me how many countries they exported to. He didn't list awards or certifications. Instead, he asked me a simple question. "Would you like to see where everything begins?" I answered without hesitation. Yes. Because that was exactly why I had come. Not to see bottles, not to see labels, not to see marketing. I wanted to see the trees. We spent nearly 2 hours walking through the plantations. I asked hundreds of questions, perhaps too many, but he never seemed impatient. Instead, he smiled. "I think your grandmother would have asked the same questions." That sentence stayed with me. As we walked, I noticed workers harvesting only healthy branches. No one was stripping entire trees. No one was breaking limbs carelessly. Harvesting looked almost gentle. One young woman noticed me watching. She smiled and said, "If we care for the tree today, it will care for us tomorrow." I almost laughed. Those were nearly the exact words my own mother had spoken to me decades earlier. Different country, different family, same philosophy. One thing especially impressed me. Nothing appeared to be wasted. Leaves destined for food were handled differently from leaves intended for drying. Seeds were carefully collected. Branches were returned to enrich the soil. Even parts of the harvest that most people would overlook found another purpose. I asked why. The answer was beautifully simple. Nature wastes very little. Why should we? That sentence reminded me of my father. After trimming fruit trees, he never burned the branches without first asking whether they could still serve the farm. Some became compost. Some became fuel. Some protected young plants. He believed that every gift from nature deserved one final opportunity to be useful. Standing there, I realized I wasn't learning something new. I was rediscovering lessons from my childhood. Eventually, we entered the processing area. I'll admit something. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Beautiful farms are important. But if careless processing destroys the quality of the harvest, much of that effort is lost. The first thing I noticed was the cleanliness. Everything seemed thoughtfully organized. Freshly harvested leaves moved steadily through each stage. Nothing sat forgotten in the heat. Nothing appeared rushed. I asked endless questions. How quickly are the leaves processed? How are they cleaned? How are they dried? How do you protect them from humidity? How often is quality tested? Every answer led to another question. I have always believed that truly knowledgeable people enjoy honest questions. These people certainly did. No one seemed offended. In fact, they appeared delighted that someone cared enough to ask. During lunch, we sat together beneath a shaded terrace overlooking the plantation. No one talked about sales. Instead, we spoke about farmers. One manager explained that the company worked closely with growers, helping them improve soil health rather than simply demanding larger harvests. Another spoke about teaching families better harvesting methods so that trees remained productive year after year. I found that refreshing. The easiest way to increase production is often to demand more. The wisest way is to help the tree remain healthy for many years. Nature almost always rewards patience. After lunch, I was shown something that made an even deeper impression on me. A small laboratory, not a huge research center, not filled with expensive machines simply for show. Instead, it was a place where samples were carefully examined. Moisture levels, purity, consistency, quality. One of the scientists smiled when he saw my curiosity. "We don't test because we distrust nature," he said. "We test because we respect the people who will eventually use these products. I thought that was one of the finest explanations I had ever heard. Science was not replacing nature. Science was protecting it. As the afternoon drew to a close, we walked once more through the gardens. The sunlight filtered softly through the leaves. Birdsong filled the warm air. For a moment I closed my eyes. I could almost hear my grandmother's footsteps beside me. I imagined what she might have thought. She probably wouldn't have understood every machine. She certainly wouldn't have recognized every piece of modern equipment, but I believe she would have understood the attitude: respect, patience, care, gratitude. Those values never grow old. Technology changes, people change, markets change. Those values do not. Before I left, someone asked me a question. "Sally, after everything you've seen today, what impressed you the most?" I thought carefully before answering. "It wasn't your factory." They looked surprised. "It wasn't your laboratory." Now they seemed even more puzzled. "It wasn't even your products." There was silence. Then I smiled. It was the way everyone here spoke about the tree, because that's what I had been listening to all day. Not the words, the attitude behind the words. You can tell a great deal about people by the way they describe something they love. Some speak only about what they can earn from it. Others speak about what they can learn from it. I had found people who were still learning. That gave me confidence. As I drove away that evening, I carried no boxes of products with me, only something much more valuable: trust. Trust cannot be bought. It cannot be printed on a label. It cannot be created by clever advertising. It grows slowly, very much like a moringa tree. In the next chapter, I'll share why that trust eventually led me to use some of their products in my own home, especially during those busy seasons of life when I simply don't have time to harvest fresh leaves every day. I'll also explain why choosing a quality product matters just as much as choosing to include moringa in your daily routine. Chapter 10. Why I Trust Their Products. My mother often reminded me, trust is earned slowly. The moment you stop asking questions, you begin making mistakes. When I returned home from that visit, several friends asked me the same question. "So, what did you think?" I smiled. "I think I found people who love the tree as much as I do." That answer surprised them. They had expected me to talk about modern equipment, large buildings, advanced technology. Instead, I spoke about people. Perhaps that sounds strange. But after many years of working with Moringa, I have learned that people matter far more than machines. Good people usually produce good products. The opposite is not always true. Back at Sally's farm, life quickly returned to its familiar rhythm. The ducks still demanded breakfast before sunrise. The chickens still believed every visitor had arrived carrying food just for them. The dogs still followed me wherever I went. The moringa trees continued growing exactly as they always had. Nature doesn't become impressed because someone has visited a modern factory. It simply keeps growing. One morning, while preparing breakfast, I smiled to myself. I had just picked fresh moringa leaves from the garden. Within minutes, they were in a pan with garlic, onions, eggs, and a handful of fresh herbs. As I sat down to eat, I thought, this is still my favorite way. Nothing compares with food-picked moments before it reaches your plate. If you have your own healthy moringa tree, use it, enjoy it, celebrate it. Nature doesn't get much fresher than that. But life isn't always so simple. There are weeks when I travel, weeks when I spend long days meeting farmers, weeks when I am speaking at events or visiting friends in other provinces. Sometimes I leave home before sunrise and don't return until long after dark. On days like those, my own moringa trees patiently wait for me. That is simply life. Years ago, I used to worry about those busy seasons. I thought, if I can't prepare everything myself, perhaps I should simply go without. My mother laughed when I told her, "Sally, you don't stop eating vegetables simply because you couldn't grow them yourself today." She was right. Sometimes we need a little help. The important thing is knowing who we trust. That is when I began using products from the company I told you about in the previous chapter. Not every day, not instead of fresh leaves, but alongside the life I was already living. If I was away from home, I packed a small container of carefully prepared moringa powder. If I wanted a warm drink while traveling, I enjoyed their tea. If my skin became dry after long days working under the tropical sun, I occasionally reached for their cold-pressed moringa oil instead of making my own, not because I couldn't make these things. I can. In fact, I still enjoy doing so whenever I have time. I use fresh leaves whenever they are available. I sometimes dry my own leaves. I still prepare recipes exactly as my mother taught me. Those traditions will always remain part of my life. But I also believe something else. Modern life should not force us to choose between convenience and quality. If someone else has already done the work with honesty, skill, and respect, there is nothing wrong with accepting that helping hand. One afternoon, a visitor asked me a question that made me smile. "Sally, if you know how to make everything yourself, why would you ever buy someone else's products?" I answered honestly. "For the same reason I sometimes buy bread." He looked puzzled. "I know how to bake. I simply don't always have time." He laughed. I hadn't thought of it that way. Neither had I, until that very moment. Sometimes the simplest answers are the best. As time passed, I became familiar with more of their work. I discovered that they weren't interested in producing only one or two products. Instead, they seemed determined to use every valuable part of the moringa tree responsibly. That impressed me enormously. The leaves became nutritious foods, teas, and powders. The seeds were carefully pressed to produce a beautifully light oil that many people enjoy for skin care and hair care. Other parts of the harvest found practical uses rather than being discarded. Even the material left after oil production continued to serve useful purposes. Nothing seemed to be treated as waste without first asking, what else might this become? That question reminded me so much of my father. On our farm, every resource had value. Rice straw fed animals. Animal manure enriched the soil. Fallen leaves became compost. Rainwater was collected whenever possible. One thing supported another. Nature is full of circles. Very little truly ends. It simply begins another purpose. Over the years, I have also learned something that many people don't expect me to say. Not every moringa product is the same. That may sound obvious, but many people assume that if two packets both say moringa, they must be identical. They are not. The tree may be the same. Everything else may be different. How was it grown? How healthy was the soil? When were the leaves harvested? How were they dried? How were they stored? Was quality tested? Were unnecessary additives used? These questions matter a great deal. That is one reason I waited until this point in the book before talking about products at all. I wanted you to understand why quality matters before I suggested that quality exists. Too often we choose products by reading the front of the package. perhaps we should spend a little more time wondering what happened long before the package was printed. Several readers have already written to me asking, "Sally, will you tell us which company you personally trust?" The answer is yes, I will, but not quite yet. Before I introduce them properly, I want you to understand the remarkable journey that each leaf makes, from a living tree to your kitchen. Once you understand that journey, you'll also understand why careful harvesting, gentle drying, clean processing, and honest people make all the difference. Near the end of this book, I'll share more about the company whose philosophy won my respect. You'll also find additional information in the companion Moringa recipe book, where I talk about the ingredients I personally like to keep in my own kitchen and the products I reach for when fresh leaves aren't within arm's reach. For now, I hope you'll remember one simple lesson. The best product is not always the one with the brightest label. It is the one made by people who respect the tree from the moment the first leaf is picked until the moment reaches your home. Convenience should never replace quality. The best producers make sure it doesn't have to. Chapter 11. What the Tree Has Taught Me. My mother used to tell me, some lessons are learned in school. The most important ones are often learned in the garden. When people visit Sally's farm, they often ask me the same question. "Sally, after all these years, what has the Moringa tree taught you?" For a long time, I wasn't sure how to answer. The easy answer would be to speak about nutrition, about vitamins, about minerals, about antioxidants, about all the remarkable discoveries scientists continue to make. Those things are certainly important. But if I'm being completely honest, they are not the first things that come to mind. When I think about the Moringa tree, I don't first remember research papers. I remember my grandmother's hands. I remember my mother's gentle voice. I remember my father kneeling in the soil after the first rain of the season, smiling because he knew the trees had received exactly what they needed. The tree has never spoken a single word, yet somehow it has taught me lessons that have stayed with me for an entire lifetime. One of the first lessons was patience. When I was a little girl, I wanted everything to happen quickly. If we planted a seed today, I wanted a tree tomorrow. If we pruned a branch, I expected new leaves the following week. If we watered the garden in the morning, I imagined everything should already look different by evening. My grandmother would laugh. She never hurried the garden. She never pulled on a leaf to make it grow faster. She never stood beside a tree complaining because it was taking too long. Instead, she would simply say, "Nature is never late." At the time, I didn't understand those words. Today, I think about them almost every day. We live in a world that has become impatient. We want instant answers, instant success, instant health, instant happiness. But nature still follows the same rhythm it always has. A seed germinates when it is ready. Roots grow before branches. Strength develops long before beauty appears. Perhaps people are not so different. Sometimes we become discouraged because we cannot see progress. But just because we cannot see it doesn't mean nothing is happening. Roots are growing beneath the surface. That may be true of trees. It may also be true of us. Chapter 12. The Seeds We Leave Behind. My grandmother used to say, "A wise person never plants a tree only for themselves. They plant it for someone they may never meet." There is something deeply humbling about holding a single moringa seed in your hand. It is so small, so light, so ordinary. If you dropped it onto the ground, most people would walk past without even noticing it. Yet hidden inside that little seed is everything it needs to become a tree that may one day feed a family, shade a garden, nourish animals, enrich the soil, and produce thousands upon thousands of new seeds. Nature has always amazed me that way. It hides extraordinary possibilities inside the simplest things. When I was a child, my father kept a small cloth bag hanging from a nail in the tool shed. Inside were seeds, not just moringa seeds. There were chili seeds, pumpkin seeds, long beans, herbs, flowers, and many others that I could never remember the names of. Every year, after harvest, he would quietly add new seeds to the bag. I once asked him why he saved so many. He smiled and answered with another question. What happens if one season fails? I shrugged. I don't know. You plant again. That was his answer. Simple, confident, almost obvious. He wasn't just storing seeds. He was storing hope. Many years later, I realized that farmers all over the world understand something that many other people forget. Every harvest eventually comes to an end. Every growing season finishes, but the story never ends because someone has saved the seed. My grandmother had a different way of looking at it. She believed every seed carried a responsibility. Never waste it. Never throw it away carelessly. And never forget that someone before you saved it for your benefit. Whenever we collected mature moringa pods, she never rushed. She would sit on the veranda in the late afternoon while the air slowly cooled. One by one, she opened the dry pods. Inside were rows of beautifully shaped seeds, each with its delicate papery wings. To me, they looked almost like tiny butterflies waiting to fly away. She placed them carefully into woven baskets. Some would be planted, some would be shared with neighbors, some would be kept for the following season. Nothing was decided in a hurry. Everything had its purpose. I remember asking, "Grandmother, why don't we plant every seed?" She smiled, "Because wisdom is knowing that tomorrow also needs something." Years later, when Sally's farm began welcoming visitors from around the world, I noticed something interesting. Almost everyone wanted to take something home. Some bought tea. Some chose moringa powder. Others preferred oil or dried leaves. But every now and then someone would ask, "Do you have seeds?" Those were always my favorite conversations, because anyone asking for seeds wasn't looking for a quick solution. They were thinking about the future. I would often walk them to one of the older trees. Together, we would look up into the branches. Then I would place a few seeds into the palm of their hand, holding them there for a moment before letting go. "These are not gifts," I would say with a smile. "They are responsibilities." Most people looked surprised. Then I explained, "If you plant them, care for them. If they grow well, share them. If they produce more seeds than you need, give some away." That is how generosity grows. It is exactly how my grandmother taught me. Not every seed will germinate. Not every young tree will survive. Nature has never promised perfection. Some seasons bring drought. Others bring storms. Sometimes insects arrive unexpectedly. Sometimes the soil needs more care than we first imagined. That is not failure. That is farming. My father often reminded me that every farmer has difficult years. The successful ones are not those who never face problems. They are the ones who never stop planting. I have carried that lesson into every part of my life. There have been moments when I doubted myself, projects that did not succeed, dreams that took far longer than I expected, plans that had to change. Whenever those moments came, I thought about the little cloth bag hanging in my father's shed. There was always another seed, always another season, always another opportunity to begin again. As I have grown older, I have come to believe that people are very much like gardens. The words we speak become seeds. The kindness we show becomes seeds. The meals we share become seeds. The example we set becomes seeds. We may never know where they finally take root. My grandmother never imagined that one day I would write this book. My mother never imagined that readers on the other side of the world would prepare recipes she taught me in our little kitchen. Yet, here we are. Their seeds are still growing, not in the soil this time, but in the hearts of people they never had the chance to meet. Perhaps that is the most beautiful harvest of all. Before every visitor leaves Sally's farm, I like to walk with them to the garden one last time. Some take photographs. Some stand quietly beneath the trees. Some ask one final question. Others simply smile. As they leave, I often find myself wondering what they will remember most. Will it be the taste of fresh Moringa tea? The stories about my grandmother? The peaceful mornings? The recipes? The laughter around the kitchen table? I honestly don't know. But I hope they remember one thing, that every beautiful future begins with something very small. Sometimes it begins with a single seed. The greatest inheritance is not what we leave in someone's hands, but what we inspire them to plant. Chapter 13. Every ending is a new beginning. My mother used to say, "Don't be afraid when one chapter of life comes to an end. Nature has never ended a season without preparing the next one." There is an old wooden bench beneath one of the oldest moringa trees at Sally's farm. It isn't beautiful. It isn't expensive. In fact, if you saw it in a furniture store, you probably wouldn't even notice it. Time has faded its color. The tropical sun has cracked the wood in places. One leg is slightly shorter than the others, so it rocks gently whenever someone sits down. I have often thought about replacing it, but somehow I never do. That bench has heard too many stories. It has been the quiet witness to countless conversations, joyful reunions, difficult decisions, and moments of reflection. It has seen children become adults, young couples become parents, and strangers become friends. If only that old bench could speak, it would probably tell stories far better than I ever could. Whenever I have a difficult decision to make, I find myself sitting there. Not because the bench has magical powers, but because it reminds me to slow down. The world becomes strangely quiet beneath the branches of an old tree. Perhaps it is because trees are never in a hurry. Perhaps it is because they have watched generations come and go without ever losing their patience. Or perhaps it is simply because nature has a way of helping us hear our own thoughts. One afternoon, after a particularly busy season on the farm, I sat there for nearly 2 hours. Visitors had come from many different countries. Some had traveled thousands of miles. Many had brought questions. Others had brought stories. One elderly gentleman from Canada told me that he had planted his first moringa tree after reading an article many years earlier. A young couple from Australia had started growing several trees to provide fresh leaves for their family. A teacher from Kenya told me that children in her village were learning to grow moringa as part of a school garden project. A woman from Germany smiled as she explained that she had never imagined one tree could become such an important part of her daily cooking. As I listened to all these stories, I realized something extraordinary. The moringa tree had become the common language between people who otherwise had very little in common. Different countries, different cultures, different religions, different languages, yet somehow they all understood the simple joy of planting something that could nourish both people and the land. That thought stayed with me long after everyone had gone home. As evening approached, the farm became quiet again. The ducks settled beside the pond. The chickens found their favorite places to sleep. The last rays of sunlight turned the rice fields a soft golden color. I walked slowly through the garden. Everywhere I looked, I saw new growth, young leaves replacing old ones, fresh flowers appearing where there had been none only weeks before, tiny seedlings pushing their way through the soil. Nature never mourns the ending of one season for very long. It is already preparing the next. I sometimes wonder what my grandmother would think if she could walk beside me today. She would probably laugh at how much attention people now give to the tree she simply called part of the garden. She would almost certainly shake her head at some of the extravagant claims people make. Then she would quietly prepare dinner and remind us that no healthy life was ever built on promises alone. It was built one meal at a time, one day at a time, one choice at a time. That was always her way. Simple, honest, practical. The older I become, the more I appreciate that simplicity. We live in a world that often celebrates dramatic transformations. Lose weight in 30 days. Change your life in a week. Find the secret to perfect health. Nature smiles gently at such promises. The moringa tree has never rushed to become what it is. Neither should we. Real change is usually so gradual that we hardly notice it. One healthier breakfast, one evening walk, one extra hour of sleep, one more meal prepared from fresh ingredients, one new tree planted in the garden. Months later, we look back and realize how far we have come, not because of one giant leap, but because of hundreds of small steps. That may be the greatest lesson this tree has ever taught me. Never underestimate small beginnings. As the years have passed, I have also come to understand something else. Every visitor who leaves Sally's farm carries away something different. Some remember the taste of fresh moringa tea. Others remember the recipes. Some become fascinated by the science. Others are inspired to plant their first tree. But if there is one thing I hope everyone takes with them, it is this: nature has been waiting patiently for us all along. It asks for very little: a little respect, a little patience, a little gratitude, and in return, it offers far more than we often realize. As darkness settled over the farm that evening, I stood beneath the oldest moringa tree and looked up through its branches. I remembered my grandmother. I remembered my mother. I remembered my father. 3 ordinary people who never imagined that the quiet lessons they shared would one day travel far beyond our little village. Without realizing it, they had planted far more than trees. They had planted values. They had planted hope. They had planted a way of living that continues to grow long after they are gone. Perhaps that is what every ending really is. Not the closing of a story, but the beginning of another. Tomorrow morning, before the first light touches the leaves, I'll make myself a cup of warm moringa tea and walk once more to the old bench beneath the tree. I'd love for you to join me. There is one last story I'd like to share. Life moves forward one season at a time. The wisest among us learn to welcome each new beginning with gratitude. A letter from Sally. Dear friend, before you close this book, there is one last thing I would like to tell you. When I first sat down to write these pages, I thought I was writing about a remarkable tree. But somewhere along the journey, I realized I was really writing about 3 remarkable people: my grandmother, my mother, and my father. The Moringa tree simply became the thread that connected their lives to mine. When I was a little girl, I believed they were teaching me how to grow a tree. Only much later did I understand they were teaching me how to live. They taught me that good health begins long before illness appears. They taught me that the best meals are often the simplest. They taught me to respect the land that feeds us, the animals that depend on us, and the people who share our table. Most of all, they taught me that gratitude is something we practice every day, not only on special occasions, every day. As the years passed, I traveled farther than I ever imagined. I met researchers whose knowledge humbled me. I met farmers whose hands carried generations of experience. I met doctors who reminded me that good nutrition and good medicine belong together, not in competition with one another. I met families from every corner of the world who simply wanted to live a little healthier and a little closer to nature. Every one of them taught me something, and every one of them strengthened my belief that nature still has much to teach us if we are willing to slow down and listen. If there is one thing I hope you take away from this book, it is not that Moringa is extraordinary. It certainly is. But that is not the most important lesson. The most important lesson is this: nature has always worked quietly. A seed never announces that it is becoming a tree. The sunrise never asks for applause. A mother's love rarely seeks recognition. The greatest gifts in life often arrive without making any noise at all. Perhaps that is why they are so easy to overlook. If, after reading this book, you decide to plant a moringa tree, I hope it grows well. If you prepare one of the recipes, I hope you enjoy sharing it with the people you love. If you discover a high-quality moringa tea, powder, or oil that makes healthy living a little easier during busy times, I hope it serves you well. But even if none of those things happen, I hope you will still remember to step outside from time to time. Feel the morning air, listen to the birds, notice the changing seasons. Prepare a meal from fresh ingredients. Sit down without looking at a screen. Share your table. Call someone you haven't spoken to in a while. Plant something. Grow something. Pass something on. Because in the end, that is how every meaningful life is measured. Not by what we collected, but by what we shared. I often think about my grandmother. She never knew that one day people from around the world would hear her stories. My mother never imagined that the little lessons she whispered while we worked in the garden would travel far beyond our village. They weren't trying to leave a legacy. They were simply living with kindness, honesty, and gratitude. Perhaps that is exactly how the finest legacies are created. Quietly, without expectation, one day at a time, one meal at a time, one act of kindness at a time. If this book has inspired you, then don't let the inspiration end with the final page. Take one small step. Plant a seed. Cook a healthier meal. Learn something new. Teach a child. Help a neighbor. Care for the soil beneath your feet. Whatever you choose, do it with love. One day, someone you may never meet could be grateful that you did. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for walking beside me through the gardens of my childhood. Thank you for listening to the stories of my grandmother, my mother, and my father. And thank you for reminding me, through your own curiosity, that these stories are still worth telling. I hope our paths cross again someday. Until then, may your home be filled with laughter. May your table always have nourishing food. May your garden remind you that every new beginning starts with something small. And may you never lose the quiet wonder of discovering the extraordinary gifts that nature has placed all around us. With love and gratitude, Sally. My grandmother planted a tree. My mother cared for it. My father taught me to respect the soil beneath it. I have shared their story. Now, the next chapter belongs to you.